So yesterday with my wife, we were watching the movie Philadelphia, and if you haven't seen it, it's a movie about this man who is portrayed by Tom Hanks, and he's a man that is has chosen a homosexual lifestyle, and but he was diagnosed with AIDS, and so he was more or less slowly suffering from the disease. And in the movie, Denzel Washington plays another lawyer. And so both of them are lawyers in the movie. And, well, I'll just get to this eventually, but my wife and I were watching it, and I watched it one time before, but I really, I watch a good amount of movies, and they really impact my messages. If it's a movie that is touching or whatever, God brings them to mind so as to where I can make a point in what I'm speaking about. I can use examples just to show, where we are as Christians, and where our current state is in our thinking and, in regards to other people. And so, watching the movie, I was seeing various things, in one, a few moments in the movie. There was one first moment where, Andrew Beckett, who is, the gentleman that has chose the homosexual lifestyle and is suffering from AIDS, he came to visit his fellow lawyer, acquaintance, and he needed help legally because his law firm fired him more or less because he had AIDS, and so he was discriminated against. So you could see in the movie how the director wanted to show just the discrimination and the fear that somebody has, and maybe it could be personal judgments toward just anybody in general that has the AIDS virus. And well, it showed you know Denzel Washington's character Joe Miller shook his hands, and then he more or less asked Andrew Beckett why he was there, and why he was fired, and more or less, and he said because he had AIDS. And so while he was shaking his hand, he looked down at his hand and took his hand out of Andrew Beckett's hand, and more or less it was showing that he didn't want to be infected by the AIDS virus. And so from that moment on, his personal judgments toward Andrew Beckett, was, very visible. He didn't want to represent Andrew in the case because of his personal judgments. He didn't like anybody that was homosexual. And so you could see that in various times in the movie where he made you know, judgmental remarks, and he more or less posed fun of, homosexual people. And you saw one instance in the movie where Joe Miller went into, I believe it was a pharmacy, and this, tall guy comes up to him with a basketball in his hand, and he was more or less cheering Joe Miller on for representing more or less the gay community. And so the guy asks Joe Miller out for a drink. And he said he doesn't usually pick up people in a drugstore. And so Joe got offended and said, I'm not homosexual. And and the guy more or less was coming on to him, and he said, this is why I don't like you kind of people, and why people don't like homosexuals, because you do this and stuff like that. So, and I was just seeing different parts in the movie, and my wife was more or less gasping at just the judgments toward the homosexual community. And and so different things like this was popping up in the movie, and it just it really shows us a reflection of our own hearts in regarding people. And, there's two ways to view this, and, there's the world's ways of doing it, and then there's the way Christians view it. And so I really want to show and ask God to shed any light on our hearts about any possible judgments we have toward them. And just for us to know that it's not beneficial in the body of Christ to follow the way the world does things. So, after watching Philadelphia, I looked at how I would react myself with somebody that had AIDS due to homosexuality. Would I have the same reaction that Joe Miller did when he shook Andrew's hands? And, at the close of the movie, I'll get to that eventually. Now, Joe Miller didn't want to be near Andrew because he thought he would be infected. And you saw that when he was shaking his hands. And, if you think about it, it's a legitimate concern. In the movie, there was this woman that, had the AIDS virus too in the firm. And she got it not because of, the homosexual lifestyle, but because she had a blood transfusion and she was given somebody whose blood had the AIDS virus, so she was infected. And so she developed, lesions on her body as well, to where, that was the reason why his law firm recognized that Andrew had AIDS, because of the lesions on his forehead. So they put two and two together and they fired him. So, a lot of people would have concern about, receiving the AIDS virus, because immediately once they think they receive it, they're going to die. So, man is cautious with that. But we can easily get to that place where we take our eyes off the person and place them on, either their sin or, like the example I just gave about, the AIDS virus itself and how people are afraid of it. But you could see Joe's change, that he was seeing that Andrew was more than his AIDS virus. He was more than the disease that he had. And he saw, just a real person there. He saw that Andrew was a man that had feelings. And you can see another part of it in the movie where Andrew was showing Joe, this opera song, and just how Andrew was feeling the words of it, and, the change in whether the tempo or the change of the instruments. He was showing Joe this, and Joe took it with him and took it to heart. And you could see the change in Joe's own heart, where before he didn't want to touch Andrew. But at the conclusion, Andrew had an oxygen mask on his face, and it was strapped around his ears. And so Joe, took it off Andrew's head. He touched him to do that. And, he took it off his head so that Andrew could talk. And so it showed just how much of a change that it was. And I'm sure that very act really touched Andrew. So, watching the movie, looking at my own heart and, wanting to share this message so that it would be a reflection of your own as well, is, I was just thinking about how Christians have so much judgment toward the homosexual people, where they just identify them by their sin, and that's it. There's no getting to know the person, because, you get to know somebody, you can see how they are, You could see, their characters, and, you wouldn't be so judgmental with somebody that you care about. You know what I mean? So, you know, a lot of people in this world hate anybody that is homosexual. You could see it visibly. And there's also some that are for it, as you know. Now, there are a growing number of people in the world that think that homosexuals are born that way, and of course that's a separate issue. And so, we're going to move into Christianity itself and how they view homosexuals. Now, many believers focus on the sin and not the person. You could see that evident. I mean, there are a lot of churches that hold signs up condemning anybody that's choosing a homosexual lifestyle. And there is no really talking to them because their minds are set in their hate. They judge them as sinners that are not worthy of love. But how is it that we as Christians think that homosexuality is such a great sin and it's greater than any other? To me, sin is sin. Lying is just as bad as homosexuality, and fornication is just as bad as coveting. But that is really the problem with Christians, is where they take their eyes off the person and focus only on the sin that they are dealing with. It could be a father and son are at odds with each other, and the father doesn't like what the son's doing. And, maybe the son did something really bad, so the father's bitter toward the son. And it's because of the actions of his son in which would stop him from loving his son. So in the same way, Christians would keep anybody, homosexuals or, whatever it is, they would keep them at a distance. And it's as if the person has a label on them. And they're known only by that label and not by the person themselves. They don't know the person. They don't know about this person's past. Now, how many people that have chosen a homosexual lifestyle are in it because they were molested, or they were hurt, or maybe because of how sensitive they are, they wanted a hug from their dad, and so their dad, because their dad is macho, they didn't want to give their son a hug and say, "What are you, gay?" or something like that, and so they deny their child love. And so it brings confusion to the child, and the child chooses that lifestyle. Who knows how it would have began. And so for many, it began at such a young age that maybe the person thought that they were born that way. So the enemy can definitely use, the hurt that, a lot of people who chose that lifestyle, the enemy can, move them into that place to where they would choose it. And so that it takes them off the path that God originally had for them. But, we can't, as Christians, view somebody by their sin. We got to see them. We got to see who they are and the struggles that they're going through. Everyone has struggles. Everyone has a story, but are we going to take a step out and read their story? Are we going to get to know them? They have feelings. Like I said, they're going through stuff. And so if we as Christians can take our eyes off what they've chosen and get to know their hearts, get to know them as individuals, then we can see that it's not about, their sin. It's about, knowing who they are. They have personality. They have different characters. Whatever it might be, are we willing to take a step out and get to know somebody and not just focus on, what they have chosen. Getting to know them is something many wouldn't do, but they, like I said, they keep them at a distance. But we as Christians need to take the initiative. Now, to truly love means that you get into the problems with them. You share their burdens. Now, I'm not talking about that you share their lifestyle. I'm thinking about what Paul said is that to the Jew, I become a Jew, but I don't take on, the Jewish laws. And to the Gentiles, I become a Gentile, but I don't remove the law of God. So, which means that we need to empathize with each person. We need to, share their burdens with them to get to know them so that they could see Jesus in us and that they can choose Jesus. And I think about how Jesus has, showed his love to different people that had chosen different sins. I mean, look at the Samaritans and their way of lives, and, Zacchaeus, and then the adulteress, and, Judas, and then, Saul, who was a Pharisee. Each had their own different sins, but Jesus loved them, each of them. Look at Zacchaeus. He was a tax collector who, stolen from the Jewish people. And there was no record of Jesus, speaking any kind of sermon. He was just there. And by Jesus' presence, that is how Zacchaeus was changed. All he said to Zacchaeus was that he knew Zacchaeus. He walked up, and the Father gave him a word of knowledge about who Zacchaeus was. Which man? And it was a man that climbed up a tree just to see Jesus because he was short. So Jesus called him by name. He said, Zacchaeus, come down from the tree. I must have supper with you. And that is all that was said. And he said, see, Lord, I will sell half of my possessions. I'll give half, or I'll give double to anyone that I have wronged. And Jesus, commended his actions. So, like I said, there was no record of Jesus preaching sin in which, showed Zacchaeus his sin. Zacchaeus was already convicted by, just being around Jesus because of Jesus' love. And then you think about the adulteress. They wanted to, all the Pharisees wanted to stone her because of her lifestyle. And Jesus said that he who is without sin cast the first stone. Then he turned to her and said, turn from your sin, more or less. But Jesus loved each and every one of them. And then I think about Judas, who was supposedly Jesus's, friend, and he turned, his back on Jesus. And, Judas loved money, and he sold the Lord out, but the Lord still called him friend. And then I look at, Saul, who was a Pharisee who persecuted Christians because they had Jesus. And so Jesus showed himself to Saul, who then became Paul. So in each of a person's sin, Jesus didn't focus on their sin. Jesus looked at them. So in like manner, we as Christians need to show our light, because if we show our light and we show that we really care about somebody, we show that we're there for them, that we listen to them, we spend time with them, they're going to know that God resides in us. We're going to be known by showing our light because of the love of doing that, not from pointing out their sin. So, my question, actually I have a few of these before I get to the questions. Jesus didn't hang out with those that were righteous. He hung out with quote-unquote sinners. And that is how he gained a following. It's because his love was so great that it changed their hearts. He wouldn't side with anyone today if he lived on earth with anyone that hate. If anything, he would be right along with those who were labeled sinners. And through his presence with them, that is how they would be changed. If Jesus walked on earth today, he would gain a following. I mean, I can see him going to, a gay pride parade. And just by his presence, it would be convicting. Not that he would point out anyone's sin, but by his presence, we want to confess. And I think about, Jesse Duplantis, when he had a trip up to heaven, he stood in front of Jesus and, he was like this. And Jesus said, I forgive you. He didn't say a word. Jesus knew what he was going to say. So, likewise, Jesus can go to a gay pride parade and just be there. And immediately everyone would look at him and then they would follow him. Jesus can go into a prison where there's murderers and stuff that are, hell-bent on continuing in their actions. They have no regret. But Jesus can go in their midst and be in the middle of them. Not say a word, and they would follow him. So he wouldn't he wouldn't side with those that hate. He would be with those that are hated. So, in conclusion, I want to, share a couple of questions for you to think about. And the first one is, which shines more light? Which shines more light? Is it hate or love? And second question, in which way do you want to follow? So I want to give you, this message, and I pray that it really blesses you and that it leads you into, really thinking about, not looking at people's sins, but looking at the person themselves. And so if we may encounter somebody that has chosen homosexuality, or somebody that, steals, or whatever it might be, let us not look at what they do, but look at who they are. And, let us hear God's voice and be guided by him, in our actions. So I'm going to end it. So I got cut off, but I was at the conclusion anyway. So I want to thank you for taking the time to watch it. And, let us look at people, in their heart, so that we can show the light of Christ and his love, that they may receive him, and, really get to know, who Jesus is. And let us put off, judgmental, how we treat people that have chosen homosexual lifestyle. We need to put off, the judgments, because Jesus said is that we are not to judge anybody of the world. We're to judge those that are in the church. So we need to stop thinking that way and start looking at people, because that's what it's all about. It's for us to know, the people that God has created, and, God didn't create them in their sin. They've chosen the sin, but God created that person, in their specific character. So, let's move away from the judgments that Christians have been labeled as, being judgmental and stuff like that. And, let's really show, the world that, we as Christians are different. So I'm going to end it here. Thanks for taking the time to watch.